Good evening, everyone.
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
Don't you, for miles?
Thank you for coming out tonight. I know that with the temperatures the way they are and the forecast and all, some of us probably woke up this morning and we're like, is this event going to take form or not? And I had a couple of conversations with people here and there, and I say with a smile that we're here. I'm glad that you all made it out, and hopefully we'll get you out before it starts snowing. So we really appreciate that. Now, in terms of you being seated here, if you feel that the urge to go for seconds or to grab a drink, don't feel shy about that. We want you to enjoy yourself. We welcome you to the Global Executive Forum, and we welcome you to Spindletop. My name is Omar Ayash. Most of you know me. I am the president and CEO of the World Trade Center here, and I'm very excited to bring to you to this wonderful forum. We've got a great lineup of speakers. Our panelists are already seated here, but we'll introduce to you in a little bit. But before we get rolling here, the first person to join us is to create some welcoming remarks is Prashar Joshi, the chairman of the World Trade Center here in Kentucky. Give him a round of applause.
Good evening. How are you guys doing? Hear me okay? All right, perfect. I usually don't need a microphone, but I figured I'll keep one here. Omar's right. It will not snow. I don't know what they're talking about. I think it's sunny out there, so I think it's a bunch of BS, but what do we know? So good evening. Prashar Joshi, the chairman of the World Trade Center of Kentucky. I've been a chairman now for 4 years within the World Trade Center, and I'm truly honored to stand here today in the group of individuals and businesses to represent the very heart of our Commonwealth economic engine here. That's what you guys are. We're gathered today to not just to celebrate, but to acknowledge the critical moment in the life of World Trade Center of Kentucky. As many of you know, we recently faced a significant challenges in reduction of fundings from both the city of Lexington and the city of Louisville. So the World Trade Center really is minding its own business because we're not getting a lot of support, generally speaking, from the cities for a lot of good reasons. The decisions will understand given the circumstances, right? The circumstances for both the cities are not easy right now from a budget standpoint. So we understand that, and we're trying to figure out how to continue to grow this mission that we have and continue to do the vital work that you'll hear today and the things that Omar and the team have been doing for a long time. But in the face of these challenges, some extraordinary things have happened that you and the business community need to understand it. You guys have stepped up a lot. The business community over here has done a tremendous job in helping the World Trade Center in both sponsorship and membership and everything you've done to try to foster the World Trade Center. So first and foremost, I want to thank you very, very much for doing that for us and continue to grow that, sir. The outpouring of support has been amazing. The support we get from the sponsors, the speakers, the CEOs in the community, the memberships here, the universities, both Louisville, which unfortunately didn't show up today because of the snow, and the University of Kentucky. It's been amazing for us. And so that continues to be something that we will thrive on and continue to get the support from. It's because of this belief of our mission that we continue to provide essential services, connecting Kentucky businesses with international partners, which is very, very big from a standpoint, offering vital trade education. The International Trade Certification is the class that's happening next week at Valvoline. Thank you, Valvoline, for supporting that as always, for hosting that. So that training course is an amazing training course to send business students, export-import people that really support and want to know what it means to be in this business. And that trade certification that Omar and the rest of the people here that support us put on is an amazing trade. It's, I would say, one of the best that we have in the state of Kentucky, if not in the tri-state area. Promoting Kentucky products, that's part of our job. Part of the World Trade's job is to promote products and the companies around it. It's not just sufficient for us to give you support in trading and exporting, but we want to support the Kentucky businesses. It is our mission, bar none, we support trade, we grow trade. If somebody asks you what does World Trade Center do, what do you say? We grow trade. Perfect. That's the easiest thing you say. Those are 3 words that go a long way. And it is our job to help those Kentucky companies to grow trade and to speak about their products and to speak about their companies and support their growth, not only within Kentucky, outside of Kentucky, and everywhere else that we go forward. And then really attracting foreign direct investment to a Commonwealth. This started, the World Trade Center started because of Martha Lane Collins and Toyota. For those that don't know, it's because of that big acquisition that Toyota coming to Kentucky is how this grew, and it is part of our job to continue to drive that and bring other foreign investment opportunities. And you'll see we bring consulates always from all over the world. Asian consulates were here. We got Canadian consulates that are coming in a month from now, sometime in May. So we'll continue to do these things that drive value for the organization and the Kentucky companies here, right? It's not just abstract goals that we want to translate into real jobs. That's our goal. These are not just goals we put out there, but we want to make sure that anything we do helps turn this into real jobs and economic growth for the company. Otherwise, there's no value for the companies to be involved, right? Our goal is not just to have another nonprofit. We want to have a nonprofit that's value add to the companies and the membership that's involved in it, and that's our goal. And from that standpoint, it is our goal to continue to help the small businesses grow and in the new markets, and to export and import and grow outside of the tri-state area in Kentucky. However, it's becoming harder and harder. The global marketplace is constantly evolving. And we must remain agile. We must be responsive in the needs of Kentucky businesses. And to do this effectively, we need continued sponsorship. As I spoke earlier today, with the cities really disbanding the support, and very understandable why they're doing some of these things, we continue to rely on you guys, the partnerships that we have, the membership that we have, the companies that we have to continue to grow and to be able to give you guys the programs that we have together. And so we are incredibly, incredibly grateful and have support from what we've received. We recognize that sustained success requires sustained investment, right? That's always one of those things. You build it, they will come. And that's part of our thing, is we need to grow success and we have to have investment. We're not simply asking for charity. That's never the goal of the World Trade Center. We're inviting Kentucky to make it into the future. We want investment into the World Trade Center, the investment of your own business and the future workforce, right? The goal is, as we grow and support your companies, we grow and support your workforce. As we educate and train your workforces in areas that can help you, that's really going to be a full circle of opportunities that you continue to come back and support the World Trade Center. We understand the economic times can be uncertain. We must know that by working together to overcome these challenges, we're asking to consider increasing your support, right? My job as a chair and the board member chair is to continue to, how can we help Omar grow the World Trade Center? What can we do to connect with the other companies? And we're asking you guys, we're asking a challenge for the companies to start thinking about how you can help us, both financially as well as volunteering, as well as connecting us with other companies, other resources, other memberships that can help us increase our support through membership renewals, corporate sponsorships. We have so many of those available. We have so many events to sponsor things like meals, sponsor things like events are always available because every dollar counts for any nonprofit. As you guys all invest in nonprofits, you understand that. We're confident that our continued partnership, the World Trade Center, will only not survive, but thrive. We're seeing this, right? We took it down. When I first took over the World Trade Center, we basically took it down to bare bones. We took it down to everything. We left everything. We hired Omar 3 years. It's 3 years now, Omar. And we basically are building it back up. That's our goal. Sometimes you have to tear down and build up, and that's what we've done, and we'll continue to do it. These events continue to be very important, and you see people involved in it. You see the communications that we continue to have with other CAM and other partnerships that we have, and we want to continue to grow that, working with the communities around here. So our goal is to be the catalyst to bridge growth and the global marketplace and be vital source of the Kentucky business, right? I thank you for the belief in our mission, right? Thank you for showing up. I thank you for participating, being engaged. I thank you for the students and the universities showing up. I think that they're amazing. They do a great job for us. I can't thank University of Kentucky enough. I would thank Louisville, but they're not here, so we don't have to thank them, I guess, right? No, I'm just kidding. I thank Vernon Foster and the Louisville team, too. They do a great job, and we look forward to the continued journey. So thank you so much, and I'll hand it back to Omar.
Thank you, Prasher. And really, it's been an exciting journey the last 3 years, rebuilding the organization and creating the momentum. Many times I tell the companies that I meet with, we're a startup with a legacy. So, you've got a World Trade Center that's got 30 years in place, and then we had to go out there and sort of create the MVP and make sure that a lot of the programs that we have a demand in the market. And we came to a conclusion, the majority of the programs have a demand in the market. Like Prasher said, the International Trade Certification, more than 600 people certified over the last 5 years. Our international trade missions, we've done 2, and we're going on the 3rd one. And actually, Sarah and I got to meet in Dubai last October, so this is why she's here. It's part of that trade mission. We created a new program, the podcast, this Global Trade Adventure, 21 episodes as a result of that. Funny enough, the one on bourbon was the one that hit record numbers, I thought, they might enjoy the one on culture more, but bourbon one tends to be moving in that direction. But with that, we continue to innovate. We continue to work with different universities. Right now, we're running for maybe the 10th year in a row an intercultural program at the University of Kentucky MBA program, where we certify the MBA students in intercultural intelligence. So a lot of good momentum is happening with the organization. But at the same time, I'll be really remiss if I don't say the current climate that we're living in, what is it, 30 days into it almost now, with this new administration and how trade tariffs and trade policies being affected almost every day. I can't keep up with it, even though it's a point of interest for me and it's something that I'm very much interested. But you wake up in the morning and there's a 25% trade tariff towards this country. You go to bed at night, oh, well, they've negotiated and then that's been lifted. But it's at the end of the day, it's going to affect how we do business, and it's going to affect how we do business. This morning, I got a message from the Canadians. I think that there are 99 Canadian companies operating here in the state of Kentucky. In Murray, in London, in Lexington, 7,000 jobs are as a result of those Canadian companies operating here. $9 billion of exports into Canada, $6 billion of imports into the U.S. from Canada, and these are only Kentucky numbers. And if you look at that in terms of the information that relates to China, relates to Mexico and Europe, one of the tariffs is going to come into effect with the bourbon industry, where we're going to see our numbers of bourbon being reduced going into Europe. So there's real impact on, the agility of your business, on the profitability of your business. And at the end of the day, there's 2 things that will eventually happen if we're not agile. One, we might lose jobs here in the state of Kentucky, and we don't want that, because our number 1 job as an economic development agency is to help Kentucky companies grow their exports in order to grow jobs. And 2, these tariffs, if they fully come into place, it's going to affect us in our pocket at the grocery store. I mean, every product in some shape or form is going to increase as a result of those tariffs and what have you. Look, some of the trade policy, I could be totally for it. And I think, as a result of that, I'd be remiss if, in the 80s, we didn't put quotas on the foreign automotive industry. We would have not had Toyota come to the state of Kentucky, or we would have not seen more foreign manufacturers coming into the United States. And I wonder if we do the same things right now, are we going to see that, where more Chinese companies are going to start setting up manufacturing plants here in the United States, the automotive companies? I don't know. I don't see that happening, but the conversations that we're having today and the conversations that we have every day really affects the way we run our business. And as I travel the world and I see how great things are happening in the state of Kentucky, and whenever we take a delegation, we visit with the American ambassador, Martina Strong, in the UAE, or the EXIM Bank president, and they hear that there's a delegation from Kentucky, and they know that, aerospace, automotive, pharmaceuticals, GE Appliances, Ford Motor Company are all companies that are homegrown here in Kentucky and are doing very well in terms of international operation. It's something that we really want to celebrate. All right, a few things before we move on to the order of business. I've got to recognize the companies that have bought tables from us. Samtec, thank you for buying a table. Appreciate it. Alltech, we really appreciate your support. Commerce Lexington, our partner here, always, thank you. It looks like the UPS team has not been able to make it. They got too busy flying, making sure the planes are landing in Louisville, but we appreciate your support. University of Kentucky College, Gatton College of Business, really appreciate that. Round of applause for them. Valvoline Global Products. I think I've got everyone here. The other thing that I want is the board members that are available here, please stand up. Board members, stand up. All right, give them a round of applause. Thank you for your service. And I know that I have several students that are interning with me from the Patterson School of Diplomacy. Please stand up. They're in-house interns, but I also have several students from Gatton College of Business that are interning with me, but they're not in-house, they're being outsourced. So please stand up. You know, they're doing project in a different way. Anyhow, so again, thank you very much. Let's get on to the heart of the program here. One of our board members, John Peloza, is the Associate Dean at the Gatton College of Business and Economics. John and I connected maybe a year ago and started talking about Gatton Global Week, and then all of a sudden I got him to join the board, and then we're involved in a number of different programs. And I really enjoy the partnership that the World Trade Center has gotten with Gatton, and I enjoy the partnership with John. Not only is he a faculty member and a professor of marketing at the College of Business, but I think he also DJs every Friday. So, you know, when I knew he's a DJ, I thought, hey, what better moderator to have than actually a DJ? So without further ado, over to you, John.
Hi, this is Peloza, host of Your Father's Music program every Wednesday, 2 to 4 on WRFL. That's it. As Omar mentioned, I'm an associate dean with the Gatton College of Business and Economics at the University of Kentucky. New to this family, but I can't say how happy I am to be part of this. Our mission is to serve the state of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We do that through the creation of knowledge to help Kentucky businesses be competitive on the world stage. And we also produce the best damn graduates this state has ever seen, many of whom are here, and I encourage you to meet them if you have not yet connected with our students. But on with the panel. So speaking of faculty, our first panelist is a faculty member, a colleague of mine. To my right, Felipe Benguria, Associate Professor at the Department of Economics, graduated PhD from University of Virginia 2014, specializing in international trade and international macroeconomics. Published research in several papers on the tariffs, and his research on trade wars has been cited in The Economist and the 4-year review of the Section 301 of the tariffs on China. To his right is Sarah Whitten, the Senior Vice President for China and Transformational Export Program, or CTEP, at the Export-Import Bank of the United States. In this role, she oversees the CTEP program, which aims to support U.S. exporters facing competition from the People's Republic of China and to ensure U.S. leadership in 10 key transformational export areas. Before her work in the U.S. government, she was an executive director and global account manager at Standard Chartered Bank in South Africa. There she managed a portfolio of multinational corporations and provided a range of financing and risk management solutions over a decade-long period based in South Africa. And to her right is Frank Jemly III, President and CEO of the Kentucky Association of Manufacturers, joined in 2021 after holding leadership roles in public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Previously served as an investor and advisor at a tech startup in Louisville. Most of his career in public affairs roles, working for Governors Andy Beshear and Matt Bevin, and a native of Bardstown, served on not one, I believe, but 2 aircraft carriers. It's pretty badass. The topic is U.S.-China relations, a broad-ranging series of questions I'm going to pose to the panel. We're going to leave some time at the end to make sure that everyone can get their own questions answered, and of course more time at the end to maybe have another drink and some food. But let me kick it off with you, Frank. Can you talk about the challenges unique to Kentucky businesses in navigating this changing landscape of tariffs, intellectual property, regulations between the U.S. and China?
Yeah, all in a minute or two.
All in a minute or two. If you could just encapsulate that into 5 sentences, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't think they're unique to Kentucky, John. You know, as Omar alluded to, it's been a remarkable 30 days internationally in terms of trade. The challenge vis-a-vis China is multifaceted, but I think the challenge is pertinent to American companies, not just Kentucky companies.
Sarah, what do you think?
I have to second that comment, and you know, we're really seeing a lot of the competition is, as you mentioned in the introduction, the CTEP program covers a whole host of nascent technology sectors, spanning from semiconductors to biotech to battery storage. And those are the sectors that we're seeing U.S. companies face a lot of challenges from state-backed and state-financed flows from the Chinese government. And maybe just to illustrate that point, China EXIM in one fiscal year authorized over $360 billion of transactions, and that's 1 year. China Development Bank, $460 billion, one fiscal year. Sinosure, which is the state insurance company, close to $1 trillion. And that's just the 3 formal state-owned enterprises in China. There's about 26 additional banks and state-owned banks that are being directed to support certain sectors, to support, there's actually a short list of companies that they're directed to support. And so, you know, as we, as U.S. government, you know, in partnership with the private sector, try and support these types of transactions, I think it's helpful just to have that backdrop in mind to think about the sheer scale of what U.S. companies are up against. And, you know, I guess our recommendation to all of that is not to try and mirror that strategy, but rather leverage our strengths, which is, you know, the U.S. has the deepest capital markets in the world. And so how can our tools as the U.S. Export-Import Bank unlock some of that private sector financing and crowd in that capital to support those types of transactions? So, you know, I think to Frank's point, it's not where we're seeing it, it's very macro and across the board, you know, U.S. companies operating in these areas are seeing increasing challenges when they're going up against bids overseas.
How about you, Felipe? What does your research say about the challenges of these tariffs for Kentucky business?
Yeah, so very happy to be here, and I've been doing research on especially the first wave of this situation in 2018 and 2019, and now starting to look at the numbers of what we've seen in, you know, these past few days. So the first point is that the decoupling, as we could call it, between the U.S. and China has gone through 2 administrations, you know, different parties, and it seems like it's going to be here for the long run, you know, starting from the pretty broad tariffs in 2018, 2019, but then following with the more targeted restrictions on electric vehicles and batteries for electric vehicles and products like that in 2024, and now the 10% tariffs that we saw this month. So that decoupling between the U.S. and China feels like it's continuing for a long term. Now, the second point I was going to mention now is that it's really important to try to move from these broad trends that we hear to understanding the numbers and what they mean for, you know, your companies and the Kentucky economy. So, for example, last week I was asked to get a sense of how important the potential retaliation from Canada that did not go through, it was postponed, but Canada enacted a list of products that would be targeted. How important would that be for Kentucky, right? And we had heard, you know, lots of scary numbers, and it turns out that while Kentucky exports a lot to Canada, only 2% of Kentucky exports belong to the list targeted by the potential Canadian tariffs, right? And so in the case of China, and kind of connecting to something you said, it's much more difficult to measure because on one hand you can see the list of products that are targeted by tariffs, and that's very clear. But on the other hand, there's different amounts of state-owned enterprises in the different sectors in China. So very important in energy, very important in food, less important in textiles, let's say. And those state-owned enterprises also restrict U.S. exports as part of the retaliatory package, right? So I think that trying to put numbers into this, let's say, trade war is kind of pretty important.
Frank, that brings me to a point you made. You said this is not unique to Kentucky businesses. Are there sectors within the Kentucky business landscape that you think are particularly vulnerable, or there might be opportunities from some of these relationship shifts?
Yeah, I can't say I'm expert enough to really comment on opportunities, John. Sectors, I would assume bourbon is relevant, going west and east, you know, as I think Omar Prosher alluded to. You know, a big export sector for us is aerospace, but I don't think much of that is going east. I'd defer to our professor for more expertise.
What do you think, Felipe?
So, in terms of the sectors, yeah, there's like different channels. So first, foreign tariffs. So in the 2018-2019, bourbon was targeted by the European Union. So that sector seems to be a favorite for retaliation. On the other hand, we make cars and we make things that need metals. And so if we have tariffs on metals, that can raise the cost of producing here. Now there's been a lot of discussion of to what extent the tariff is going to raise the prices of the things that we consume, going from consumer products to manufacturing inputs. In the 2018 and 2019 round of tariffs, I would say that pretty much everyone who looked at the data found that the prices were increasing. Pretty much the full amount of the tariff was passing on to prices. So I would expect to see something similar this time around. Right?
Sarah, what's the world look like from your angle?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, tariffs is a major concern, and of course, my colleagues in the U.S. Trade Representative's office are focused on the policy structures around that. But what we're really seeing at EXIM and through the CTEP portfolio and engagements with states is this focus on critical minerals. You know, it's really started in the last administration. It's been continuing in the new administration. And it's only been a couple weeks into the new year, but in 2025 alone, we've seen 2 rounds of export bans for certain types of critical minerals coming from China. And the first round was on 3 minerals, gallium, germanium, and antimony. And those 3 alone, where the U.S. are almost completely import reliant, is impacted. The impact is expected to be around $3.4 billion to the U.S. GDP. And so the next round is also concerning because there is a longer list of critical minerals that have been listed, including tungsten, which is used in a lot of defense articles. And I think, as we all know, China controls a high percentage of the value chain. There's a lot of ownership that Chinese entities have in the mines globally, in Africa, in Latin America, and other locations as well. And then a lot of the midstream refining is happening in China as well. So when you look at the flow of minerals, a lot of these critical areas that are important to our national security touches PRC supply chains somehow. And, you know, I think we were trying to figure out how, as U.S. government, we can support companies to diversify their supply chains away from China. And, you know, we've had several conversations with other like-minded governments like Canada, Australia, UK, South Korea, and Finland. And there's a big push within those governments, too, to try and secure offtake to their domestic industries. And so by doing so, manufacturers in those countries and manufacturers in the U.S. are insulated from economic coercion tactics when we see these export bans coming through. We even saw it with lithium in the United States. There's sufficient lithium deposits domestically here, but with China flooding the market and tanking lithium prices, a lot of those, the development of those mines became no longer economical. And so what we're trying to do, and we actually just have a new financing mechanism that we approved as EXIM to provide financing to overseas mines that are providing offtake to the United States, which is very new for us. In fact, a lot of our financing products are tied in nature and to date have been very much focused on supporting U.S. companies export externally outside of the United States. This is the first time that we have a program supporting the inflow of minerals into the United States. So, these are some of the things that we're thinking through. It's a big priority at the State Department. It continues to be. I think we'll see sort of these impacts in a lot of different sectors. I mentioned the CTEP portfolio covers things like quantum computing and semiconductor. All these industries, battery storage, EVs, are reliant on critical minerals at the end of the day. So this is why we've decided to go further upstream and try and figure out solutions around this.
Yeah, you just answered, I think you answered my next question, which was, given this idea of decoupling from China, how realistic is it for American businesses to diversify supply chains and sourcing away from China? And I think people would be well served to come talk to you after about the resources you have to offer to help make that happen. If that's a question you all are facing, sounds like your group is in a perfect position to help.
Yeah, happy to engage further on this. And my colleague Mark Klein is over there. Hello, everyone. I'm sure many of you know Mark already as well, but absolutely. And so I think the question was around, whether the impact is more on the imports or export side. The way we're seeing things historically, as I mentioned, a lot of the focus has been on debt financing supporting exports. I wouldn't call it import finance because we're not financing the inflow of goods, but we're supporting overseas mines up to the amount that they're selling to the United States. So we're essentially trying to incentivize mines to move their supply away from East Asia or other places and towards the United States so that American companies have choices when it comes to where they're importing their minerals from.
Yeah, on that idea of importing versus exporting, Frank, can you talk a little bit about differences you see these tensions having on manufacturers that are importing raw goods and materials to incorporate into their products versus those that are exporting out to China finished products?
Well, actually, in Kentucky, a lot are doing both. But much of our focus, as you probably know, our number one trading partner is Canada. Number 3 is Mexico. And a lot of our output is going north and south. And that's mostly what I've heard over the last 30 days from companies that are moving product multiple times north and south. And that's a real challenge. One executive with a large Japanese company was telling me last week, just a few working days ago, that his team is very focused on trying to cost the proposals that neither Omar nor any of us can keep track of. But it's a huge challenge day to day for managers here in Kentucky, and I'm sure all over the country.
Yeah. Felipe, what do you think? What does your research tell you about this idea of companies that should be diversifying outside of China for the supply chains? Is that something you're seeing that's an outcome of the tariffs, or where do you see that?
Well, there's a lot of discussion of nearshoring, bringing supply chains closer, friendshoring, so this geopolitical divide, or bringing it home. I haven't seen, when you look at the data, you don't see that much of a change yet in U.S. imports of manufactured inputs in general. So I feel like everyone has that in their mind. I don't think there's that much of a change. And in general, what uncertainty does, it makes people kind of postpone the decisions, right? we don't know if these tariffs are going to be just for 4 years and then we're going to go back to the world of 2015, or this is going to be long-term. So there's a lot of discussion on this. I don't think in the data you see that much action yet, but it could come.
A question for either Frank or Sarah. I know we talk about these tensions a lot, but are there examples of successful partnerships or successful relationships that Kentucky businesses, or American businesses for that matter, have had with Chinese counterparts? Is there are examples we can look to as models?
Well, you know, there's a company that comes to mind named Apple that does a lot of stuff over in East Asia. You know, probably 90% of us in this room have Apple products. That's the first one that comes to mind.
That was one of the examples that came first to my mind as well. But in addition to Apple, Tesla, I mean, their Gigafactory is Shanghai-based. You know, and as Frank, you mentioned, the Apple R&D, a lot of that is happening in China as well. And maybe something more relevant to EXIM's portfolio, you know, we do a lot of transactions with Boeing, and there were some strained relations with China and Boeing for some time, but in the last year, in 2024, China now has started to procure Boeing aircraft again, so it's kind of signaling a re-entry into the market. So there certainly are, you know, a lot of interdependencies amongst large corporates, both from sort of a manufacturing perspective in China, but also as a consumer market.
What's Frank, question for you. What's either the best or worst piece of advice you've ever gotten about doing business with China?
Yeah, good question. And I'm not sure that this is really the answer, but the risk of doing business in China, the political risk, domestic and international, is inexorably going that way. So we need to be mindful of that. And a comment on Felipe's comment, you know, this decoupling, de-risking, America has been investing in East Asia for, 4 decades, give or take? So this is a long process to de-risk. You know, it's going to take more than a couple of administrations to accomplish it satisfactorily, and we need to be mindful of that. This is a long game that China is playing, a very long game. They are very good at that. We need to be better at the long game.
Sarah, how about you?
I wholeheartedly agree. Almost 2 decades ago, when I was a banker in the private sector, I covered the internationalization of the renminbi and the growth of the capital markets in China. And at the time, you know, dealing with China was the hottest thing to do. And so McDonald's, Caterpillar, all these companies were entering into the market. They were raising bonds in Chinese yuan. We were helping them with that. And my former employer, Standard Chartered Bank, they've got a large footprint in the emerging markets. They had issued a lot of sort of economic studies and such, stating if and when the Chinese economy was going to overtake the U.S. economy. And, you know, the U.S. economy is still comfortably the largest in the world, and there's signs of the Chinese economy slowing or straining, but I think the last 2 decades have shown us that the speed of growth has been astronomical. And just looking back to those days, you know, a lot of my colleagues at the time had sort of dismissed these reports of China eventually potentially overtaking the U.S. or catching up to us. And so I wonder now, you know, looking back on that, if folks would have done things differently. I don't know if they would have, but it's kind of interesting to see how that trajectory has gone over the last couple of decades. And I agree, it'll take a long time to unwind a lot of these relationships that are so deeply intertwined amongst our 2 economies.
Felipe, a related question for you. You've been studying Chinese-U.S. relationships, particularly tariffs, for 7 years now, give or take. If you were to get a question, let me put the question from the crowd. If someone were to say, that tells you that you should definitely do or not do this, what would you say?
So what? just to make sure I understand it, so firms should definitely do or
Yeah.
not do this?
Yeah, if you're a Kentucky business, based on 7 years of looking into Chinese-American relationship tariffs, you should definitely,
I will admit that I have little practical experience, but I have a lot of experience looking at the data and kind of going to my first point. I think that in general, people should not overreact as a very general principle. We had no idea last week at UK, I was talking to our people that asked me to look at this, whether this potential retaliation coming in 30 days from Canada would be very bad for Kentucky or not. We were surprised to see that pulling the official list of products, it was just 2% of exports. So you guys are all better managers than I am, but I would say no one should overreact to anything. People should look at the data and proceed cautiously. One thing I wanted to point out that I've been thinking out while you guys were talking and while I was kind of thinking out this panel, though, that hadn't been mentioned before, and I'll mention it very quickly, is that suppose that tariffs do not affect Kentucky at all, okay? So they're not gonna raise our cost based on the things that we produce, and we're not gonna get retaliation. Tariffs affect California, Indiana, other states, okay? Now we're still gonna get affected because when the US imposes tariffs, that makes the dollar stronger, right? And that's bad news for exporters, and that effect can be pretty significant. So we've been talking about tariffs. We don't read so much about the effect on the dollar. And so for anyone who is an importer or an exporter, understanding that there's a connection between the tariff and the dollar and that is going to happen and it happened before, that's also a pretty important kind of mechanism. And I know that was not part of the question, but I wanted to.
this is why you're the professor. I know I've asked all the questions you have, but in case there are any questions that I haven't already asked, my friend Omar has a microphone if anybody would like to ask something of the panel while we have them here.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Excuse me. I'm going to start out by, when I think about 1995, when China joined the World Trade Organization under the Clinton administration, and that's when a lot of our businesses started, just like Sarah was talking about, it was almost cool and hip to be involved in China, and one of our big companies here, Yum Brands, at one point, they were opening one KFC a day in China, so that's 365 KFCs a day in China. And sometimes as a person who's involved in international trade, I feel like, we've turned the vault over to the Chinese, and we should have been a little bit more careful in that and put some restrictions associated with some of our businesses involved with that. So as a result of that, all these changes that are happening here, my question to you all, why should I even bother anymore? And why should I be a business that focuses on international trade? Heck, the domestic market in the United States is big enough, and only 5% of the companies export anyway. So why should I even bother with any of the changes that are happening?
Is that a rhetorical question or? Well, we're the leading economy in the world. And in order to maintain that, to state the obvious, if we do maintain that leadership role, it will be good for the march of freedom and democracy around the world. It will be good for the standard of living in our country. And by the way, we're facing adversaries led by China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. There is a real contest of systems, and we need to be mindful of that. And we need to maintain our leadership in order to prevail in what some people call a second Cold War.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Seals. I'm actually representing UPS a little bit because I'm a retired UPSer, 34 years. But I'm actually a licensed customs broker, so I spent most of my years assessing duties and taxes and working with large companies, Pfizer and all them, on the importation and how to get goods into the U.S. So one of the questions was regarding what should I do, compliance. I would say as a broker, make sure the documents and everything that you do is compliant. Oftentimes what we see is companies try to circumvent or get a little less duties by changing some of their documents. The U.S. Customs is very laser focused on that. So from a company perspective, just do things right and make sure everything is done correctly. If your goods are from China, don't say they're from Canada. They will catch that. That wasn't my question. My question was, with manufacturing companies, do you feel that they will now move to using more free trade zones so that they can bring goods into the U.S. and possibly doing a tariff shift on items and then exporting it out of the free trade zone at a different tariff rate?
Yeah, if you're asking me, I don't know. I have not heard that concept in the last, well, how long has the new administration been in office? 4 weeks. I haven't heard that mentioned, but it's early. So very possibly, and thank you because you've given me a talking point to use with my colleagues in manufacturing, but I don't know yet.
Yeah, I was talking to a colleague at Toyota just last week. I sit on the board for Junior Achievement. And I said, hey, look at free trade zones. Bring all your goods in. Just get them into a free trade zone. You're not in the commerce of U.S., but you're in the border of U.S. Still very protected, very secure. I said, bring your goods into a free trade zone. And they can sit here for as long as you want. And then when you decide to export them out, you've already reduced your shipping costs because you're not bringing it in, maybe when shipping is higher, and your goods are here. And then he said, we're already a free trade zone. So Toyota's already taking advantage of that. But other manufacturing companies can, because they can bring in all different parts to make a vacuum cleaner and pay a whole lot for that. Change it into a vacuum cleaner, and then the duty rate is a lot less. So there's a lot of ways to get around that. Again, I'm retired. I'm still licensed, but retired, but I can always help with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a question. I'm Wally Ferrier from the University of Kentucky. I was kind of surprised, if not mildly shocked, that the EXIM Bank is investing in foreign mines. And of course, there's an arrangement to bring those minerals back. That kind of suggests, or perhaps infers, that maybe this is the beginning of a United States version of the Belt and Road Initiative. Do we need that?
That's a really interesting point that you raise. And, when we're looking at sort of trade relations and infrastructure spend, especially in the emerging markets, over the last couple of decades, we've seen those maps turn from U.S. as a primary trade partner to China as the primary trade partner. We're not suggesting anything like the Belt and Road Initiative, but I think what we're trying to do is ensure that sectors that are important for national security and defense purposes get the relevant attention from various U.S. government interagency agencies. So, for example, U.S. EXIM is not designated as a national security agency. There's folks in Department of Defense. Department of Defense has a new program that also provides financing, a smaller program, but provides financing for national security projects as well. But I think the thinking behind these kinds of changes is to use tools like U.S. EXIM and the DFC to support these strategic interests of the U.S. government more and more. And so it was actually Congress that directed us to create this China and Transformational Exports program when we were reauthorized in 2019. It was the Senate Intel Committee, which was co-led by Marco Rubio and Mark Warner, that exhorted us to create a strategy on critical minerals, which we did 2 years ago. We've included critical minerals under the CTEP portfolio as a result. And so it's really high on the radar, both from an interagency perspective, but also from the Hills perspective as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
I think also, please correct me, I believe the Biden administration did use the phrase BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, in describing some of its own programs to counter that. I believe that was a recent phenomenon, 24 perhaps, late 23. Does that ring a bell with you, Sarah?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for raising that. It went through multiple name changes, but ultimately it was called the Partnership for Global Investment and Infrastructure, PGI. And thank you so much for raising that. There was a couple of key corridors that were the focal point under that initiative. And one of them was called the Lobito Corridor in Africa, essentially connecting the port of Lobito in Angola to a lot of the mines in southern Africa through Angola, the DRC, and Zambia. And the idea behind that corridor was right now a lot of the critical minerals that are mined in Africa go to the east coast through Tanzania and then get shipped to Asia for refining. Both the DFC and a couple of other U.S. government agencies were directed to support the development of and the sort of the revamp of this railway so that the minerals could go westwards and be refined and used for Western countries, including the United States. So that was a focus under the prior administration, it's as we all said, it's only been a couple weeks into the new one, so we'll see as the strategies and focal points develop under the new NSC initiatives.
Do any of the students in the room have a question? How to get a job? Anyone interested? Curious likes to get a PhD?
Thank you. My name is Mateko, UK graduate student.
Yeah.
Okay. I've been following the discussions, and my question is on adaptation, right? So as businesses, we are now good at explaining the current problems. I can see there is too much influence of the political decisions versus the economic decisions. But then as business, are we ready to adapt to the prevailing political and trade relations or political decisions being made in terms of the China-US relations, China-Africa, or US-Africa relations? So, do we have enough ammunition to adapt to these prevailing conditions? Or what so far maybe as conduct businesses have put in place to say this is our shield, we are basing on this or are working on this? Thank you.
I have an anecdote that might start to answer that question. So this new financing mechanism called the Supply Chain Resiliency Initiative, it was just approved by our board in early January. And because of the very unique nature of this financing mechanism, we truly briefed every single stakeholder that we could think of to ensure that it was sort of addressing various points. And we were, there was enthusiasm from the U.S. OEMs that would ultimately be the beneficiaries of the critical minerals, but it was muted, and we were kind of surprised by that. And I think part of it is, it comes down to costs in many ways, and right now getting the critical minerals procured out of China is the cheapest option. So that has been a challenge. But maybe going back to Omar's point as well about, it's so challenging to figure out where the next curveball could come from in terms of tariffs or trade relations. And that really hits the nail on the head in many ways. I think it was PwC that created the CEO survey, and they do it every year. And at the end of last year, they did the CEO survey, and this year, for the first year ever, geopolitics was the #1 concern amongst CEOs, above inflation, above macroeconomic considerations, above all. And so I think, the businesses that survive, to your point, would be the ones that can sort of keep in lockstep with some of these major paradigm shifts that are happening, and to be able to create a buffer. Maybe it might not be the most economical decision to move some of your supply away from China at this stage, but perhaps that supply chain resiliency is what's needed for diversification purposes and for other purposes.
Any other questions, comments? Pressure.
What is the one piece of advice that you can give small businesses in the country? So a lot of businesses like UPS, Babbling, they have processes, they know what they need to do. But what can you give the small businesses how to be competitive and not have to worry about this trade issue that's going on with China
vis-a-vis China or the globe?
I'll open it up. China is obviously the big topic, but we'll open it up.
Yeah, I'll just offer perhaps an undesirable answer. Vis-a-vis China, extreme caution, particularly if one is a small and medium enterprise. Because, if only because the Chinese are so good at swiping and reverse engineering intellectual property. I hear from business people all the time, particularly small business people in Kentucky, who bemoan how difficult it is to sell to China because within a remarkably short period of time, Chinese manufacturers have co-opted, have duplicated their products and taken away their market share in China, and are selling those products here in the U.S., having duplicated them across the ocean. So very tough environment for small and medium going east. Going west. Going east to Europe, different matter entirely. But the Chinese are playing a tough game with this, and it's not a fair game. And Sarah's numbers in one of her early comments, close to $2 trillion among 3 Chinese entities in subsidies. Is that correct?
Per annum.
Yeah, that's a huge number.
Yeah. I guess my answer would be a slightly cheeky answer. I would say to that point, because the Chinese companies have a leg up by engaging with their state-owned enterprises, I would encourage small businesses to engage with your state-owned enterprises, which is US EXIM and our financing tools. And we actually have quite a wide range of debt support for exporters. Everything from working capital support to we can do multi-billion-dollar transactions as direct funding for overseas infrastructure projects. That kind of goes to sort of the more Belt and Road type transactions. And everything in between. I mean, we can do transactions for $5,000 too. And so I would encourage engaging with us and leveraging our tools and utilizing the more attractive financing interest rates that we can offer.
I have a question. It's really a two-part question. The first is really for the professor. I'm interested in your research from 7 years ago. When you looked at the 301 tariffs, did you worst-case scenario out everything? Specifically, both the U.S. and China created exclusions to the 301s. In fact, China essentially excluded everything that they said that they were going to put a retaliatory duty on. And then also List 4A and 4B never came into force. Did you look at that and evaluate what kind of impact that would have had on the U.S. economy and U.S. businesses? And then the second question is related to the reciprocal tariffs that were announced recently and how that would be, the Trump administration said there would be no exclusions to those. And third, I guess, really, there seems to be a progression of these tariffs over the last 7 years. We saw the Biden administration not do anything to remove them. If these go into force, do we see that this becomes a long-term, never-ending tariff war to a point, and at what point would that end?
Okay, yeah, so that's a great, super exciting question. And the second part of the question kind of got to what I was going to say on the first part. So, so in case anyone's not familiar with it, the 2018-2019 tariffs had this process of exclusions. I had looked at that in part. I never did like a full paper on that, but I was looking at who gets exclusions approved, typically larger firms, and I had the whole list of exclusions and trying to understand how the process works. But you're right, now the summary of White House actions on the White House website, I was reading it, I think it said, we're not doing exclusions anymore. They call them like a loophole. We don't want to do that. So it doesn't matter that much anymore. But what I kind of what you know, people said about the 2018, 2019 exclusions is that this was reviewed by Congress, and it was found not to be a very clear process, so not everyone had the same opportunity to getting an exclusion. But going forward, I think there's going to be no exclusions, right? But the second part of your question had to do with, is this forever, or how do you get out of a trade war, okay? And let's distinguish between China and then countries that are closer, like Canada and Mexico, potentially, assuming that that continues, or Europe. Because with China, and I'm not going to get into it, there's issues of, you know, geopolitical issues, defense issues. I mean, it's just much more than trade driving that relationship. But Canada, Mexico, and Europe are huge trading partners. And the question is, you know, once you start putting tariffs, how do you get out of a trade war? And so you look at the past, and the better example is the large tariffs that we had in the 1930s in the US and then in the rest of the world, and continuing, you know, during the Second War. And so the way to bring down tariffs that on average at that point, let's say 1945, were at 100%, to the world we had in the, you know, decades later, where the average US tariff was like 1%, you know, 10 years ago, was through cooperation. When you have a trade war, what economic analysis tells you is that no one wants to end it by its own. No one wants to be the first one to bring the tariffs down typically. And so what you need is a negotiating table. And in the case of the tariffs that we had in the 1930s and 40s, that was the predecessor of the World Trade Organization, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. But it was a simpler world because if the US and England and France, so the countries that won the war, could agree on something, they could kind of lead the world in that direction. But now you have many more interests and, you know, huge countries with very different interests. So that negotiation can be a lot tougher if it gets to that. So yeah, trade wars are not easy to get out of, I would say.
And are there any winners, Professor, of trade wars?
Well, I would say most economists prefer free trade. But as I said, I'm leaving aside things that I understand also matter, like, you know, national security issues, stuff like that. So there can be a lot of winners when you look under the microscope, like maybe companies in some sectors. But at the country level, I mean, typically we think free trade is beneficial. But the tricky thing about international trade, so two things I teach in my class. So first, trade allows you to specialize. I mean, it allows the country to specialize in what it's good at and import the other things from our countries. So it has opportunities to raise welfare. But second thing, trade creates winners and losers. So some workers benefit from trade and some workers are worse off. And that's what we've seen very clearly and heard very loudly, I think, in the last 10 years, where some people are just legitimately not happy about trade. And so it's kind of difficult to handle a policy that, like free trade, that might benefit the country as a whole, but might create winners and losers. I mean, it's not clear what you do, right?
Thank you.
We are still accepting applications for our part-time MBA program starting this fall.
One question I have is the topic tonight is about China, U.S., you know, trade, tariff, government relations. Obviously, jobs coming back to the U.S., I think it was another primary motivator for the tariff impacts. First administration, I think you commented the jobs really did not return to the U.S. They were nearshored, or for a company like Samtec, our global footprint is in Central America and throughout Asia. You know, we've been able to rebalance our manufacturing footprint to mitigate tariffs and create the right COO, you know, configurations. Question for the panel is there some writing on the wall about these tariffs going beyond China in a major way to force more jobs back to the U.S. and avoid the essentially going to a cheaper or emerging economy And then are there strategies that you're aware of that allow us or companies like us to use our global network to essentially route products through or around different country of origin within the law, but not experiencing the max tariff impacts?
I defer to you all, beyond my expertise.
In a very general level, and perhaps you want me to drill more in detail later, but at a very general level, trade is not so much how the total number of jobs, which I think is a macroeconomic variable. Unemployment is low now, and we've seen a massive amount of globalization in the last decades, and it's not like we have mass unemployment. Trade is more about the types of jobs that we want to do here, right? So do we want workers here to do more manufacturing and less services, right? Or are we happy with the direction in which things are going, in which the manufacturing employment is shrinking and the service sector is absorbing all those jobs, right? So it's what do we want to do here, right? Within manufacturing, do we want our workers to focus on everything, including the things that we used to produce here more, like textiles and furniture, or do we want them to focus on a narrower set of things that we manufacture now, like in the companies that you manage? So regarding strategies to bring more manufacturing to the U.S., I think the general notion, kind of looking at the data, is that that margin is relatively small with the tariffs. People have looked at the steel industry, and more jobs are created in the steel industry, but they're typically few. So I wouldn't be very hopeful that the tariffs will create a massive amount of manufacturing jobs in the U.S. based on past experience. I could be wrong.
But is there a reason, and sorry, I don't want to, because one of the things you said was really interesting to me, this idea of, okay, if you're gonna bring it closer to home, then we're gonna tariff Mexico, we're gonna tariff Costa Rica, Colombia, I don't know, imagine those kinds of countries. Is that something that you could see happening? I don't know who that question's for, but.
Are we already seeing that, John? From the White House? Tariffs on North and South, East and West? I think we're already seeing that, aren't we?
I've heard
Or
Mexico.
did I misunderstand?
Mexico's coming. Are you asking about other Central American countries?
Well, it's more like Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines.
Yeah.
I know what I read in the papers, but it does seem that the strategy is global, vis-a-vis our allies and our adversaries.
So I think that's they're probably coming for those too. Other questions from the group? Okay, I will invite my friend Omar to come up and close out the evening.
Thank you, John. Let's give them a round of applause. Frank, Sarah, Felipe, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. You've really enlightened us with the discussion here. Just a few closing comments that come to my mind. We have to remember that we are the #1 economy in the world, and we have to remember that China is the #2 economy in the world. So as a result of that, you put us as #1, you put them as #2, what's going to happen? They're going to compete. They're going to want to be #1, and we have to compete because that's the game. So as a result of that, you have to also understand that there's more Chinese companies that realize that tariffs are coming, and so they're moving their operations into Vietnam with Vietnamese labor or Indian labor or Bengali labor, or even just the other day I got a message out of Monterrey, Mexico, for a toy manufacturer that wants to export to the United States, but it's a Chinese company that's set up in Monterrey, Mexico. So that's also going to result in a lot of the operation as a result of that. But in closing, the most important thing that I think we need to keep in mind as business leaders, as people involved in international trade, is a key question that has been looming in my mind for the last 10 years, and I actually lecture about this, is the key difference between economic growth and economic development. The key difference between economic growth and economic development. And for me, just to put it simply, economic growth is when you worry about your numbers looking good. Economic development is when you worry about your numbers looking good, but you also worry about your community improving as a result of that. And I think, you know, we've done a very good job of that here in the state of Kentucky, and we need to continue to celebrate the growth that we've seen in the last 30 years with our academic institutions, with our businesses that have moved in here, and keep that in mind, the key difference between economic growth versus economic development. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.